Everybody knows the sound of their own house, the pipes, the floors, the way the wind hits the windows. These 4 people knew their houses too. That is how they knew something else was in there with them. My name is Sam, and for the past year, I've been trying to save up enough money to move out of my parents' place. So, when they asked me to house sit for a week while they went on a cruise, I jumped at the chance. Free room and board, plus a little extra cash for the watering the plants, and keeping an eye on their golden retriever, Gus. It's not exactly glamorous, but it's a step. This all started about a week and a half ago. On the second night, they were gone. Our house is a pretty standard 2-story suburban home, nestled on a quiet street with big oak trees. My parents have lived there for 20 years, and it's always felt safe. Their trip coincided with a stretch of incredibly heavy rain, which meant Gus and I were mostly cooped up inside. My routine was pretty simple. Wake up late, feed Gus, make some toast, watch whatever was on Netflix, take Gus out for quick dashes in the downpour, then spend the evening reading or playing video games. Around 11, I'd turn everything off, let Gus out one last time, and head to bed. The rain was constant, a drumming on the roof, and windows that made everything feel a bit more isolated. That second night, I was just about to drift off, probably around 11:15, when I heard it. 3 soft, distinct knocks on the front door. Not loud, not aggressive, just there. Knock, knock, knock. I figured it was just the wind, maybe a branch hitting the house in the storm. The old oak in our front yard often drops acorns or branches in heavy weather. I didn't even get out of bed, just rolled over and tried to ignore it. The next night, same thing. 11:15, 3 soft knocks. This time, I got up. I figured maybe it was a neighbor, though it was late. I went to the front door, peered through the peephole. Nothing, just the porch light, reflecting off the rain-slicked concrete. I even opened the door a crack, looked left and right, but the porch was empty, and the street was dark and deserted. Must be kids, I mumbled to Gus, who was looking up at me, tail wagging confusedly. Probably just messing around. It happened every single night for the rest of the week. Always around 11:15. Always 3 soft knocks, spaced exactly the same. It stopped being unsettling and started being just weird, like a nightly ritual. I'd just roll my eyes and pull the covers over my head. Sometimes, I'd even wonder if I was imagining it, if the rhythm of the rain was playing tricks on me. But Gus would always lift his head too, sometimes let out a little whine, so I knew it wasn't just me. Then came the night everything changed. After the 3rd knock, instead of just ignoring it, I felt a strange surge of frustration. Or maybe just a morbid curiosity. I got out of bed, went to the front door, and without thinking, I tapped back. Tap, tap, tap. I even made the middle tap a little faster just to see, and a second later, from the other side of the door came the exact same rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. The middle one, just a tiny bit quicker. My blood ran cold. Whatever was out there had heard me, had matched me, and it knew I was behind that door. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I was scared to even open the front door, but I had to let Gus out. As I cautiously opened it, I saw them, fresh, muddy footprints on the welcome mat, leading right up to the door. Just a few, like someone had stood there, waited, and then vanished. There were no prints leading away from the door, no sign of anyone turning around. just an abrupt stop. My parents have a Ring doorbell camera, so I immediately checked the footage from the night before. But when I scrolled to 11:15, all it showed was static, then just the rain. No person, no movement, just empty space for about 2 minutes. Then the feed came back on. That night, I barricaded the front door with a heavy armchair, but the knocks still came. Only this time, they weren't at the front. I was lying in bed trying to pretend I was asleep when I heard them from downstairs. Knock, knock, knock. This time they came from the back door near the kitchen. I heard Gus give a low growl from his dog bed in the corner, and that's when I knew I wasn't imagining things. I didn't move an inch. I just lay there, frozen, listening to the rain. The night after that was the worst. Around 11:15, the knocks didn't come from downstairs. They came from the wall right beside my bed. Knock, knock, knock. It was so close, I could almost feel the vibration through the mattress. It sounded muffled, like someone had their ear pressed to the other side, tapping softly with a knuckle. That's when I finally called the police non-emergency line. I should have called them right then, the first night, but I didn't even think of that until it was too late. 2 officers showed up about 20 minutes later, looking bored. They walked the perimeter of the house with their flashlights, checked the windows, looked for footprints in the soggy grass. They didn't find anything, said it was probably just kids playing a prank, or maybe the old house settling. They told me to call back if anything actually happened, like a broken window or a forced entry, and then they left. That was 3 days ago. My parents are due home tomorrow, and sometimes, when the house is quiet and the rain is falling, I find myself holding my breath, listening, wondering if my own heart is beating just a little too loudly, just a little too slowly, for whatever is outside to hear and match. My name is Cassie. I'm 32, recently went through a breakup and moved into this older rental house on Elm Street about 6 months ago. It's a bit of a fixer-upper, and honestly, a downgrade from what I had, but it's mine, and it's quiet. Or at least, I thought it was. This all started about a month ago. The house is a small 2-bedroom, 1-story place, built sometime in the 50s. It's got creaky floorboards and drafty windows, but it was all I could afford after everything went south. My routine is pretty simple. I work 8 to 5 at the public library downtown, drive home, make myself some dinner, maybe watch an episode or 2 of something on Netflix, and then I'm usually in bed by 10. The quiet was a relief after the breakup, a chance to just exist without drama. The house's age meant it always made some noises. Settling, the wind, the old pipes. So I was used to a certain amount of background ambiance. I noticed the first weird thing about 3 weeks in. One morning I went to make toast, and the new loaf of sourdough I'd bought 2 days prior from the local bakery, Grandma's Hearth, was down to just 3 slices. I swore I hadn't eaten that much. I'm not a big bread eater. A few days later, half a carton of organic almond milk from Trader Joe's, which I'd just opened the night before, was gone. It wasn't even expired. I just shrugged it off. I work long hours at the library. Sometimes I'm just exhausted and forget what I've eaten. Maybe I drank more milk than I thought. It was probably just me being scatterbrained, stressed from the breakup and adjusting to living alone. But then other things started. The old gas furnace in the basement would kick on in the middle of the night, even though I kept the thermostat at 65 degrees. And it wasn't that cold outside. It would rumble to life with a groan, then hiss as the vents pushed lukewarm air into the house. Around 2 or 3 a.m., I'd check the thermostat in the morning. and it would still be set right where I left it. A faint, stale smell, like damp earth mixed with old, unwashed clothes, started hanging around the upstairs hallway. I kept opening windows, but it didn't help. It clung to the air near the access to the attic, which was located in a small closet inside the spare room, and the creaking. This house creaks, sure, but these weren't the usual house groans. This was a distinct, methodical series of soft thumps and creaks, moving in a straight line directly over the ceiling of my main hallway, leading from the spare room towards my bedroom, like someone was pacing a narrow beam, slow and deliberate, when I knew for a fact no one was up there. The real chill came a couple of weeks later. I needed to charge my phone, but my main charger was acting up. I remembered I had a spare USB-C charger, one I bought at Target in the small guest room drawer, the one I never use. I opened the drawer, and there it was, plugged into the wall outlet next to the dresser. I never plug that charger in unless I'm actively using it, and I hadn't used it in months. And right next to it, my spare house key, a brass key, usually cold to the touch, which I kept in a small felt bag in that same drawer. Felt distinctly warm, like someone had just put it down after holding it tight for a while. That's when I finally decided to check the attic. My hands were shaking. I went into the guest room, opened the closet, and pulled down the flimsy string. The heavy wooden square of the hatch groaned open, revealing the dark, dusty space above. I grabbed my phone flashlight and peered in. Tucked into a corner, behind a stack of old cardboard boxes I'd never bothered to unpack, was a makeshift bed, a stack of 3 old, faded moving blankets, my spare pillow from the linen closet, and a small white ceramic plate. It was one of my everyday set, the one from IKEA, and it had a few tiny brown breadcrumbs on it. I backed out quickly, slammed the hatch shut. My heart was pounding like a drum. I went to bed, utterly freaked out. The next morning I tried to open it again. I tugged on the string. Nothing. I tried to push it up with a broom handle. It wouldn't budge. Finally, I realized it was bolted from the inside, from up there. The next day, I was scrolling through my phone, looking for a photo of my cat, Mittens, when I saw it. A picture I didn't remember taking. The photo was dark, grainy, and slightly angled up. It showed the foot of my bed, my legs a lump under the duvet, and the wall beyond. The red digital clock on my bedside table was clearly visible, reading 3:17 a.m. My breath hitched. I called the police right then. I should have called them when I found the nest, but I just froze up. 2 officers came out. Officers Miller and Ramirez. They were polite, but their faces said, "Crazy lady." They went into the attic, shone their tactical flashlights around. "Ma'am, it's just insulation and rafters. Nothing here." They said the bolt on the hatch was just stiff, old wood. No sign of forced entry. No signs anyone's been up here recently, Officer Miller said, looking at me like I was making it up. They told me I should probably get new locks, maybe set up a cheap camera. That was 3 days ago. I haven't been back to the house, not really. I'm staying at my friend Sarah's place across town, but last night my friend was out and I had to go back to my house to grab my work laptop. When I walked into the hallway, that faint, stale, earthy smell was back. Stronger this time. And then I heard it again. Creak, creak, creak. Right above me, moving slowly, deliberately down the hall. I didn't even look up, but I just grabbed my laptop and ran. I don't know if they're still up there, or if they're waiting for me to come back for good. But I know one thing. They know when I'm home and when I'm not. And I have a feeling they're not happy I called the police. My name is Sarah, and I'm a junior graphic designer working downtown. I moved into my first solo apartment about 6 months ago, a ground floor unit in an older building with a shared courtyard. It's not fancy, and I'm still figuring things out. But it pays to have my own space. This all started about 2 months ago, right after I finally felt like I was settling in. My routine back then was pretty simple. I'd wake up around 7, commute on the C train to the design firm, then get home around 6. I'd usually make dinner, something easy like pasta or a frozen lasagna, then kick back with Netflix and maybe a book before heading to bed around 11. My bedroom window faced directly across the courtyard, about 30 feet, to another ground floor apartment and then another above it. The neighbor living in the apartment directly above mine, Mrs. Gable, was an older woman, maybe 70, with kind eyes and a knack for gardening. She had a little window box, and I'd often see her out there, tending her petunias. The first time something felt a little off was a Monday morning. I'd spent Sunday night making a big batch of chili, simmering it for hours, and the smell had definitely lingered in my apartment. I was heading out the door when Mrs. Gable, watering her flowers, called out, "Good morning, dear. My, that chili smelled wonderful last night. Hope you had enough for leftovers." I just smiled and waved, thinking it was nice of her to notice. I figured she must have smelled it through my open window, or maybe heard the fan over my stove. The building was old and the walls were thin, so I just chalked it up to that. But then it started happening more often. A few days later, she commented, "Oh, you were home late last night, dear. Saw your kitchen light on way after midnight." Another time, she said, "Getting to be quite the night owl, aren't we? Saw you watching that true crime show again from the couch." My husband loved those. I started to notice how specific her comments were. She knew when I'd ordered takeout, what time I went to bed, even if I was sleeping on the couch instead of my actual bed. I still rationalized it. Maybe the light from the TV reflected weirdly, or she just had really good hearing and noticed my patterns. I even found it a little comforting sometimes, like I had a free security guard keeping an eye on things. I was living alone for the first time, and it was nice to have someone who seemed to care. The chill really set in about a month ago. It was a cold night, and I'd decided to sleep on the couch in the living room because I'd fallen asleep watching a movie. My living room window, like the bedroom, faced the courtyard, but I'd pulled the heavy blackout blinds completely shut, and I'd turned off all the lights. The next morning, as I was leaving for work, Mrs. Gable was at her window again. She waved brightly and said, "Good morning, Sarah. You looked a bit cold last night, dear, even with that blanket. Hope you got some proper sleep after that long day." My heart just dropped. She knew my name, which wasn't a huge leap, but the "you looked cold" part, that was impossible. My blinds were completely shut, my lights were off, and I was on the couch. There was no way she could have seen me. I just mumbled something about getting a good night's sleep and practically ran out the door. That evening, the first thing I did when I got home was examine my living room window. I pulled the heavy vertical blinds across, then got down on my hands and knees to look up. And there it was, a tiny hairline gap, maybe 1/8 of an inch wide, right where the two panels of the blinds met the window frame. It wasn't visible from a standing position, but if you were looking from the right angle, and if you were low enough, you could see a sliver of the room. I went outside and looked up at Mrs. Gable's window. It was perfectly aligned. A few nights later, I happened to glance up at her window before bed. There was a folding chair positioned right at her window, angled directly towards my apartment. And on the sill, next to it, I could just make out the glint of what looked like binoculars. The next day, I went down to the property management office. I asked about Mrs. Gable. The manager looked her up on the system, frowning. Mrs. Gable, we don't have anyone by that name living in apartment 2C. That unit is rented to an Eleanor Vance. Eleanor Vance. Not Mrs. Gable. My stomach twisted. I called the non-emergency police line after that, but they said there wasn't much they could do. Unless she's trespassing or making direct threats, ma'am. Watching from your own window isn't a crime. The property manager basically echoed that, saying they couldn't evict someone just for looking out a window. I should have just packed my bags that day. But I'm stubborn, and a lease is a lease. And I really did like the apartment otherwise. And that was 3 days ago. I bought new, truly blackout curtains for both windows, extra thick ones, and I've taped the edges to the wall just to be sure. I haven't seen Mrs. Gable or Eleanor Vance in the courtyard since, but every night now, I sleep in the living room, curled up on the couch, facing away from that window just in case. Sometimes, when I wake up in the dark, I swear I can still feel her eyes on me, even through all the fabric and tape. My name is Sarah. I'm a freelance graphic designer, and for the past 3 months, I've been staying at my aunt's old house out in the sticks. It's a temporary thing, saving up for my own down payment, so yeah, not exactly living the dream, but it's quiet and it has good internet. This all started about 3 weeks ago, right before that big blizzard hit. The house itself is pretty old, a big 2-story with a long, dark hallway on the main floor that leads to the bedrooms. My aunt had installed one of those motion sensor lights in that hallway years ago, probably for when she got up for a midnight snack. It's a bit out of the way, about 30 minutes from the nearest small town. So when the weather forecast started calling for a historic amount of snow, I made sure to stock up on groceries, a few books, and some movies. I was actually looking forward to a few days of being totally isolated. Just me and my laptop. Everything was fine for the first day of the storm. The snow was piling up fast, but I was cozy inside, reading in the living room. It was late afternoon, still light out, but gloomy with all the clouds. I remember I was really engrossed in this sci-fi novel when, out of nowhere, the motion sensor light in the hallway clicked on. I looked up, a little startled. There was nothing there. Nobody was moving. I just shrugged and went back to my book. I figured it was the old wiring, you know? This house is ancient, and the storm was really picking up outside. Maybe a draft from under the door, or just the heavy wind messing with things. But then it started happening more. The next morning, I went into the kitchen to make coffee, and the door to the pantry, which I was absolutely positive I'd latched shut the night before, was open by a few inches. I just thought, okay, Sarah, you're losing it. Later that day, I had the little portable radio on the kitchen counter tuned to NPR, listening to updates about the storm. I walked out to the living room for a bit, came back, and the station had been changed to some twangy country music. I never listened to country. It was weird, but I still wrote it off as static or a faulty dial. The third day, I used a mug for my morning tea, left it in the sink. A few hours later, I saw not one, but 2 mugs in the sink. One with my tea remnants, and another with what looked like old coffee grounds. That's when a little shiver went down my spine. That afternoon, the storm finally let up a bit. The sun was trying to peek through. and everything was covered in this pristine, untouched white blanket of snow. I bundled up and decided to go outside for some fresh air and to check on my car, which was buried up to its windows. As I walked around, taking in the quiet, I noticed something in the snow around the house. Footprints. Someone had walked all the way around the perimeter, right through the fresh powder. My heart started to pound. No, wait. That's not right. These footprints, they go all the way around the house, and there are no tracks leading away. None at all. They just circled the house and then stopped. I practically ran back inside, slamming the door and locking it. My hands were shaking. I started checking every single door and window, every lock. When I got to the basement door off the kitchen, my blood ran cold. I'd latched that shut with the hook and eye bolt the day I arrived, just as a habit. Now it was unlatched, slightly ajar. I slammed it shut and threw the bolt across, my breath catching in my throat. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just old house quirks, but I knew better now. Hours later, trying to distract myself by watching a movie in bed, I heard it, a soft, shallow breathing sound, coming from the floor vent near my bed. It was coming from the basement. I pulled the blankets up to my chin, my heart racing, not daring to move. Then, as night fell, the power flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. I grabbed my phone, tried the flashlight. Everything was pitch black. I knew exactly what had happened. The breaker box for the whole house is outside on the back wall, right by the kitchen door. Someone had to be standing there to flip that switch. My hands were shaking so bad, I almost dropped the phone. I dialed 911 immediately. I tried to explain, stumbling over my words, about the footprints, the basement door, the breathing, now the power being out. The dispatcher was sympathetic, but she said, "Ma'am, the roads are completely impassable. We can't get an officer out there until sometime tomorrow morning, maybe even late morning." I should have called them right after I saw those footprints, or when I found the basement door. But I just kept trying to tell myself I was imagining things. And that was about 2 hours ago. The house is still dark and absolutely silent, except for the wind outside. I'm huddled in the living room, under a thick blanket, phone charged, flashlight on, listening. Just listening. I don't know who's here or what they want, but I know one thing for sure now. I was never alone in this house.